And what I wanted to do is just draw on a little bit of the research that we have been doing. We do this each year. The piece this year had 120 countries involved and just on 9,000 participants. So it's a fairly big piece of research where each year we say, what are the trends? What's in the mindset of business leaders, of human resource practitioners that we can be playing back to our clients and people who are passionate about the human asset and what are we doing to create value in the organisations that we're part of. So to try and keep it somewhat as simple as I can, because I do want to force us to zoom out a little bit. I'm conscious that in the day-to-day of what we're involved in, sometimes it's nice just to sort of sit back for a little bit and say, what's the contribution and the role that I, as a human resource practitioner, are playing? And so with that in mind, I've got 4 P's for you. Paradox, purpose, potential, and perspective. So the 4 P's. So if you forget anything else that I say today, then you might just latch on to paradox, purpose, potential, and perspective. What do I mean by that? Paradox in the sense that how does one seemingly keep contradictory features or truths sitting alongside each other? Because in our COVID world right now, there is so much paradox of what we're having to balance. And then with that as our context, what can we as human resource practitioners do as we create purpose and that sense of meaning in our work, as we increase people's potential for long-term success, and as we create the perspective to navigate the future of work? So they're the 3 areas that I'd like to touch on. So firstly, let me talk about the paradox, which is our first slide. If we can drop to that, that'd be great. So in the world that we live in, we are seeing paradoxes every day. I'm sure you all experience these as we've got our social calendars at one end are empty, but many of us feel somewhat emotionally overwhelmed. Our physical distance has increased our social intimacy. You know, to regain our freedom, we've got to remain indoors. And in an organisational context, we're wanting to strengthen connection of our workers, but they're not necessarily physically with us. We're wanting to protect our workers' well-being, but then we're also asking them to relinquish some of their privacy. So there are these paradoxes that we find ourselves very much in this COVID world. So there is this question and this paradox that sits also between what is distinctly human and the technology-driven world. Is it possible that we can remain distinctly human in a technology-driven world? Sort of the tech edge meeting the human edge. Because we know that technology creates a world where anything and everything can be individualized. Yet from a human desire perspective, we have a sense of belonging to a larger whole, that desire to be something part of something larger. Technology creates a need for people to be constantly reinvent themselves, but yet humans, we still desire a sense of security. So, and then we also find that technology creates a sense that anything can change, anything that can change, it will, but yet humans, we desire a sense of certainty in order to support those bold steps forwards that we take. So this is that sort of sense of paradox that sits, and how do we as leaders in the human resource area manage to create that balance? At many organisations that I go to, I will see that both of those things are running in parallel, they're running separately. And I often ask, how well do we as human resource practitioners collaborate and work with our CIOs? Are we lockstep with them as we're driving this joint agenda that sits across the organisation? Because my experience is that we've got a parallel track of our leaders in the organisation that are pursuing the technology agenda, and then there are we within human resources that are driving down the human agenda. And my proposition for us today is that it's very important for us to look for ways to bring these two together. And that's certainly what we found as we looked at our HC trends, that leaders are looking, the organisations that are succeeding here are bringing those two together. And so what are the three things that, the other three Ps that I touch on that are important in that we see from our HC trends in what they're doing? Well, the first one is purpose. So our next slide is that. And as we revisit that conflict between belonging and individuality, it's what if instead of creating the divisions of individuality, we could create a source of strength by bringing together the unique complementary abilities in the pursuit of shared goals. So we see individuality as a strength, but we can create purpose, and we can create that purpose by embedding meaning into everything that we do. One of the great delights and joys that I had of working in the pharma industry, and certainly as exemplified by that wonderful video that we saw at the start, was the way in which we can bring meaning into what it is that we do. And a lot of organisations really wrestle with that, but it's you're gifted in many ways in a pharma context. How do we do that? And so we see that in our trends, there are the areas that organisations are focusing on around purpose is firstly belonging. How most organisations, they're focusing their efforts on creating comfort and making sense of trying to create respect and treating people fairly. But whilst that's important, connection, the importance of creating the connectivity and tying that in to people's sense of purpose is important. Well-being the same. How do we make sure that we're not just thinking about the well-being of the folks that are working for us, but that we're able to bring that sense of purpose? And I know that I'm speaking very much to the converted in this context, given the nature of the industry that we work in, but that sort of belonging and well-being, very important. I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep moving along, but our third P, and the second in terms of dealing with paradox, is that of potential. It's that second conflict that I mentioned that is about bridging the gap between security and reinvention. What if instead of being perceived as a threat, reinvention could become the means for finding security in the midst of ongoing change? And that's this focus on potential. How are we focusing on the potential of the people that sit within our organisation and truly embracing that potential that's designed and organised to maximise what humans are capable of in their thinking and creating and doing in the world of machines. And when you think how this is different in our organisations today, most of organisations today are anchoring their workforce strategies on what's known about their workforces, focusing on aspects of the performance rather than focusing on aspects of the potential. What is it that we can do here? And that really plays out as we think about areas, things that we talk about super teams, this coming together of how humans are working with cognitive agents in the AI space. So much of the focus at the moment that I see in clients is they're using the machines more for efficiency. They're not using it for the insight generation and the innovation that is about the potential and the future creativity of what we've got. The whole area of knowledge management. What are we doing within our organizations to create that potential with the use that we have of great uses of the knowledge that we have, and then thinking also clearly about the way in which we're skilling and reskilling the workforce. So much of organisations at the moment are structured around job roles and job context rather than rethinking the nature of skill and capability. You might want to pick that up when we get to aspects of the Q&A a little bit later. So the third P with respect to how we deal with the paradox is that of perspective. It's where we talk about this conflict that's there that sits between boldness and uncertainty. But what if instead of prompting doubt and uncertainty, we could rise and think about new possibilities, the opportunities to shape the future through decisive action. And we believe that answer is perspective. It's an organisation that embraces perspective is the one that encourages that future orientation and thinking about how can we not just optimise for today, but we can create the value for tomorrow. And it's in this area that we see some of the shifts in thinking that exist around reward systems and compensation. And Andy's going to pick up and talk a little bit more about that. An area that is just ripe at the moment for new ways in which we can rethink the perspective of reorienting our people in terms of what they're doing. The way in which we're governing our workforce strategies, as workforce strategies and operations have evolved, many metrics and governance, they just haven't kept pace with respect to the way in which we need to be thinking more about how we're looking at the intangible asset values as opposed to aspects of the tangible assets. So our point of view that we have is that this age of paradox, with the next slide please, is really about how we embed the approach as thinking about this from a DNA as to how we weave the purpose, potential and perspective all the way through. It's the DNA of how an organisation will operate to bring that human focus into everything, empowering people to work productively with technology to create that lasting value for the individuals, for the organisations, for the society at large. So that's the sort of the way in which we're thinking that challenge. And so my question for you that we can pick up later is, how are you in your organisations blending that technology through purpose, through potential, through perspective? And herein lies the challenge that I throw out for us as an HR community with my last slide. Much as the same as we saw at the start of the decade that was prompted by the financial crisis that we had sort of in 2007, 2009, we're ending this decade with uncertainty as a result of the health challenges with COVID that is there. And so just as in the same way, the financial crisis offered a wonderful opportunity for CFOs and the finance organisation to demonstrate their value to the enterprise, I think that the health crisis presents a similar opportunity for the CHRO and the HR organisation to really step up and demonstrate the way in which we should be looking at this link that sits between the human and the tech edge. Having said that, in our research, we found that 55% of our respondents believe that HR will substantially or radically change within the next 12 to 18 months as a result of the way in which technology is impacting what we do. Yet 26% are saying that they're actually not confident in their ability to be able to make those changes going forward. So there's a desire and a need for that change, but a level of what's the confidence that we have as we are looking at that. So HR has this opportunity to expand its reach. And so that's my challenge to us, both as we work within organisations and as we advise. How is it that we can help the organisation to juggle this paradox? So just some food for thought there. I know probably feeling a little bit conceptual, but hopefully out of that day-to-day, I've just sort of taken us out to think about what's the paradox that we find ourselves in on this coming together of the tech edge and the human edge, And how are we creating that sense of purpose, potential, and perspective in the organisations that we're part of? So with that, I'm going to throw to Andy to pick up on a couple of deep dives. Andy, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Roshan, have you been able to unmute Andy?
Yes, I finally got, yeah, thanks Roshan. So David, it was kind of nice because that was a good break coming from where you were to where I will end up being. So it was good, I think in a way fortunate that we got that technology gap to come in. But frankly, well, thanks David, but so what I wanted to do in the next, 5 or 7 minutes is to broadly talk about what we've been seeing in India from the perspective of how the last 5 odd months have been for us. I think, and this is not, I'm again perhaps preaching to the choir on this, but if you look at it, we were in the first half of FY20 was about a 12% growth for the pharma business, which then and ICRA and CRISIL and everybody was predicting a 12 to 13% growth for FY21 for the industry back in January, and then suddenly COVID hit. The stock market tanked from the healthcare index. The entire thing tanked. API prices shot up with China becoming China closing down. A lot of prescription drug sales went down. So there was a deep negative period for the market and for the industry, I think in early March. From then till now, I think there's been a significant improvement as well. Both API supply has come up. The June quarter has been below what it was in the previous financial year. But again, to a large extent, you are seeing the month of June particularly was a higher uptick in volumes. Prescription drugs have come back into the play. Newer opportunities are naturally opening up. Pricing pressure in the US has come down. So there is, and obviously healthcare spending is expected to go up after all of that we are going through right now. So I think it's been an interesting journey, I'm sure, for all of you here. And I see a lot of senior HR leaders from the pharma world here. We've spoken in the last few months, and all of you reflected that thought in some way or the other. That's been very tumultuous. And in the midst of all of this, I think, and that's where to David's point, the question of paradox comes in as all of you look at these questions in front of you. At the one end, you have the very operational here and now questions of how do you keep your supply chain running, your factories running, your health and wellness of employees being protected, aspects such as ensuring that you're able to pay your monthly salaries, your cash flows are taken into account, while at the same point of time driving a more longer term transition that this crisis has presented in front of us, and all of that in front of how you virtualize your workforce. Work from home is probably just one part of it, but how do you ensure that your workforce is able to work virtually? How do you ensure that there is a larger transition that we do in our organization structures, etc.? So there's a massive sort of two engine kind of a play happening here to a large extent, and I think between Gaurav and I we'll tackle a couple of these questions as we go through. What I wanted to do is, if you can go to the next slide, is very quickly talk about, and we wanted to do a quick pulse check, but I think given where we are on time, we'll just go through that. But what we wanted to do is talk about 3 fundamental things. One is, in the immediate term, how do you respond to this situation? And obviously the levers of response, some of it you've already done, in the sense you've managed continuity of business, you've managed the continuity of your operations through health, wellness, or work from home initiatives that all of you want to take in. We are past that stage. The one last step of that is remaining for many of you is perhaps a decision on compensation. And the next 2 questions in terms of, as you go through, once that decision is taken, what do you do from your organization design perspective and your HR design perspective to prepare for this new world? So these are 3 broad questions that we want to address. If you could move to the next one, Sudarshan, I think. What we've been seeing is, and this is again both a pan-industry perspective as well as a pharma perspective, is pharma, and all of you know this, that till, if I go back 10 years into history, till 2011, 2012, pharma was a laggard when it came to pay increases, compensation, all of those things. 2011 odd, I think, was the inflection point, and I could be wrong by a year or so. But from 2011 onwards, we saw pharma having one of the highest pay increases in India year on year. And I think it was to a large extent to balance the anomaly that existed in the industry. And you caught up with, didn't entirely catch up, but I think the industry caught up a little bit to the FMCG and other consumer industries to some extent, all the way till 2017-18, after which the growth plateaued. And this year, interestingly, we are seeing it go down even further. So back in February, when we first did a check with pharma companies with regard to your pay increase projections for the year, it was in the region of 8 to 9% odd. Right now, whoever is doing pay increases, and a lot of you probably aren't doing pay increases right now, but whoever is more in the region of 6.5% odd, 6.5, 7%. So there's been a drop, but the interesting part of that still is that your drop or the changes that you're doing in your numbers is far less what the larger Indian companies are doing, where in more often than not, most cases, companies have still avoided taking any decision on pay increases. In all possibility, most of those will happen post-September. The other interesting thing that we found is that, and again, this is not just pharma, by the way, but this is again pan-industry, is that to a large extent, we are seeing the percentage of your population that was classified as top performers has come down. And while 67% represents a drastic drop, I would say it's actually happened over a period of time. The bell curves have become more mature. I mean, there is debate about whether the bell curve is right or wrong, but whichever way you look at it, the performance distribution has become sharper, and you have lesser people being rated in the top 2 or 3 blocks and much more in the middle and lower blocks. And most interestingly, the other thing that's happening, which we are seeing around your industry as well as others, is this whole repositioning of your compensation basket. I mean, taking away the dominant focus from annual fixed pay and annual cash variable pay to a little bit more around benefits, longer term compensation elements, benefits around security protection, etc. And that transition is something that we are also seeing happen. By the way, this transition that we're talking about is also one that we've been seeing. And if you go back into history, all the previous downturns, all of them have been accompanied by a significant amount of increase in the focus towards benefits. And I think that's what we will probably see after this downturn as well. I love giving this example, by the way, but if you go back into the 1930s again, and I know it's very far away, but the Great Depression was the starting point for the whole benefits as an element of compensation. And so if I look at that as probably a benchmark for what we are going through right now, you will, and if history were to repeat itself, you'll probably see benefits become an important part of compensation, at least for the next few years coming out of this downturn. If I can move ahead, I think very quickly, a couple of things that we are seeing happen as a driver, or rather as a response, it's not so much a driver, as a response to the need for companies to ensure that there is more variable elements in their overall cost structure as compared to what they had. One study that we had done a month and a half or so back is we stress tested companies' financials, and we basically saw that if there is a 20% drop, and this is, by the way, the top 100 companies in India, not sector agnostic, largest 100 companies in India by market cap. If you take those organizations and if you stress test that if their revenues go down by 20%, a fairly large percentage, about 40% of them, will not have operating cash flow to pay salaries beyond 2 months. We often don't realize this, but compensation costs tend to be the most inelastic, one of the most inelastic fixed costs in our overall structure. And therefore, then naturally, there's been a significant amount of focus on trying to make them more and more variable. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a focus on how do you reduce some elements of compensation cost, how do you reposition pay to some extent, both from the perspective of how it's structured, and then finally, how do you change the pay mix towards becoming a little bit more performance-oriented or long-term compensation-oriented. And we've seen a couple of examples of this. If we can go to the next slide, what you will see is, and we've taken a few examples of organizations without naming them in particular, but again, we are seeing one kind of organization that is trying to focus a lot more on equity-based compensation. And the equity compensation has a fundamental advantage that it is not a cash cost, but a notional P&L expense. So if you increase your equity compensation this year, you're actually giving employees the opportunity to earn money into the future. You're driving motivation, you're driving all of those aspects while not necessarily spending cash from your books. You're making a notional expense. It also helps from a tax perspective because you're paying lesser tax on account of that. So that's one direction. So we drive more equity compensation. The other is re-looking at the structure of pay by moving away from just the standard structure of looking at levels and individuals to looking more of pay based on role or job function. And again, because of the industry being one where critical skills are still very much in demand, and critical skills still command a lot of premium. People are still moving companies, and there's still jobs opening up for people with critical skills. The transition of taking pay decisions from a more level-based pay decisions to more role-specific pay decisions. And third is going micro. And the example that we're seeing here is organizations which are looking at micro units and deciding performance and pay basis micro unit performance as opposed to taking a larger overall company level view. So these are just some 3 or 4 examples that we wanted to highlight here. I know we'll probably have a lot more to cover, so I'll just move forward, and it'll be interesting for us to maybe have a conversation at the end of this presentation, perhaps. So Gaurav, over to you.
Thank you so much. So if you move to the next page, I think the one thing that we are finding in the entire area of org design is that, and I apologize if some of the numbers are a bit small, but in a sense, we looked at about 100 odd pharma companies, and we are starting to see in the last 4 or 5 months that the shape of the organization is changing. Right. So most of the organizations, when you look at it, the bulk of the workforce was always in the sales, marketing, commercial functions. Typically about 35% of FTE was in that job family. And we are finding now, I mean, the learnings from this COVID phase, virtualization, the entire digital, sort of transformation that's going on, that possibly this number is going to go down by almost 20%. Right, the entire sales FTE is going to potentially drop. But equally, when you look at some of the other functions, whether it is operations and supply chain, we are anticipating an increase in FTE because you're going to have to retool some of your supply chain and manufacturing in light with with the current geopolitics and various elements at play. R&D is going to pick up more because you'll have to sort of really look at new innovations. Whereas we are seeing that in the enabling functions, typically it will sort of stay in the same space. So we are saying that when you really look at the shape of your organization, the FTE or your workforce plans, there is going to be a need for you to rethink what is going to be the shape moving forward post-COVID. Because when I look at how our clients responded the moment there was the COVID crisis, everybody reacted at that point to whatever made sense at that point in time. It wasn't, let's take a step back and build a strategic workforce plan and see how do we move forward, integrate all the technology thinking, artificial intelligence, redesigning jobs, etc., etc. So that wasn't the thinking. It was to a point in time we need to react. So I think there's a great opportunity for us to rethink the workforce plan and org design and start to lay the foundation of an adaptable organization, which is what Deloitte calls it, right? And what is an adaptable organization is one that sort of can cut across functions and react very fast. Now you think about just the COVID response that you had. I mean, in fact, at Yash, I'll take the liberty of mentioning you here in terms of just the way the kind of cross-functional teams that came together to deal with the crisis, the business continuity planning. So I mean, that was sort of world class. And what makes it world class is the fact that you get multiple functions together in one room and sort out what makes, because you can't respond to a COVID-like crisis with just one function taking charge, right? It's sort of getting a transitionary network-based team. I mean, so I think moving forward, we are seeing that this might be the new normal, where the way we do our org design, it could be the way we do org design in the filmmaking business, or even in a consulting business, where networks of teams come together. They've never worked together in the past. They come together for a common purpose or a project, and then they disappear after that, right? So imagine there's a new drug discovery and launch. I mean, instead of going through silos and functions, what if you just formed a cross-functional team that came together for 2 years and then disappeared after that? So that's something that we are finding. Almost 74% of our clients are saying that we need to move into that kind of paradigm. There's deep thought going on in redesigning jobs to integrate AI to the point that David mentioned as well, that so far the entire notion of integrating AI was, let's take the more, the leftover work, the very tactical operational work, and get that done through machine learning and cognitive technologies. But really, the whole notion of what we call super teams is when you start to leverage AI for more value-added work, right? I mean, where you drive innovation, collaboration. So that's something that many companies are saying they're concerned about. Reskilling is a big issue. And many people are saying, by the time we figured out what are the new skills needed, the world has changed again. So instead of worrying continuously about, what are the top 5 areas to do reskilling, why don't we do potential development, right? I mean, instead of worrying about what is it that you learned in the past, look at what can you do in the future. Right? So it's a pivot to building learning agility instead of worrying too much about what skills you have. And then, the entire virtualization, we are seeing that nearly 32% of the workforce can work from remotely, and it could be work from home or could be work near home. And I just saw a video of where we're saying that traditionally, when we thought of offices, it was like a big castle where people would go, and that was the place of work, and the entire infrastructure was built around that. But we're seeing the workspace of the future is more like an airport or a train station, where people of multiple genres, they come together, they have a common purpose, and then they move away, right? So, I mean, how are we configuring our organizations for that? And that's something that I'll leave you with. What I'll do is, if I can just skip the next page and just talk about a few cases. You will have all these materials for you. Inside this, you'll find a checklist that you can use, with which you can do a self-assessment and say that, how adaptable is my organization? And the more adaptable you are, I think, you'll be much more distinctive and competitive in the post-COVID world. So you can use that checklist for doing a self-diagnostic. So over the last 4 or 5 months, we've been looking at companies. What have we been? What kind of innovative things have they been doing in their org design? There's one niche biopharmaceutical company which did a rethink of the operating model, and that was basis a shift in priority on the mental health category. Really pivoted on that. And as a result of that, they did a complete realignment of their workforce. They ended up saving $170 million from that. There's another large pharmaceutical company which has said that we are going away from our geography-based operating model. Instead of worrying about tagging people to geography, is saying that now, given the virtual world, I mean, the whole world is our talent space. So how can we move to a distributed workforce model, and really bringing the best thinking into this discussion, right? I mean, if you just think about this discussion that we're having even at Deloitte, right? I mean, if I have David here, I've got Andy here, but tomorrow I could have 7 or 8 people from around the world talking specifically about things, and that's the way we are working, right? So it's no more, okay, David is part of Sydney and he works in Sydney, right? It's that world has changed. And then finally, there's another client of ours which is really been focusing a lot on productivity. They've taken out a lot of the manual tasks. They're leveraging a lot of the AI cognitive technologies, and this is an example close on home. And just in a matter of time, they've been able to improve productivity by 5%. So that's sort of a quick set of examples. And like I said, time is a constraint, but perhaps if you have a follow-up session, we could very much dive deeper into each of this and go into details. The last part that I'll just spend a bit of time, and I'll wrap up in a couple of minutes, is around the entire HR organization. So lo and behold, when we did a survey on, amongst the C-suite, we found that 83% of our respondents are saying that they want to increase their focus on digital HR in this time. I mean, there was a time that when the entire in the pre-COVID world, anyway, we were hurtling towards technology adoption and virtualization. And imagine what COVID has done to organizations. Now, I mean, work from home has become our new reality. So in that new world, I mean, how do I create a sense of engagement? How do I enhance employee experience? Just the way we think about customer experience. We spend, consumer good companies spend so much time and effort on reimagining customer experience. Financial services companies do the same thing. How do we build up robust customer experience? Now, the same thinking has to go into employee experience, and that can only happen in today's day and age by investing in digital, where you meet people where they are, versus wait for the employees to come to your office and experience what it is. There's also a 2x increase in digital spend that's going on, and one thing that's really heartening is most of our respondents are saying that the entire objective of moving towards the new platforms is to make things easier for the workforce, as opposed to make HR efficient. So really now you're putting the workforce or the employee right at the heart of your thinking, right? And the moment you start to think of employees as the consumers, we really have to rethink how we segment the consumers. Just the way, in a consumer good company, you would seldom talk about products which are made for a certain generation, okay, who are 20 to 30, 30 to 40, this is a product meant for them. They don't think of products like that. They think of what are the values and beliefs of your consumers. How is it that you really have to how do you truly get inside the mind of the consumer, and then create programs and products around that. So the same story is going to play out in the employee experience, where we'll have to segment, come up with new, personas of people, not just based on millennials and youngsters and college grads. It's really based on values and beliefs, and then come up with various, HR strategies and technologies to come into place. So the story is not going to be driven by here is a new HR product and it makes things very effective and efficient. It's going to be how can we make our the lives of our employees who are working so hard far more engaging, and work backwards from there. So that's where I'll stop. For now, there are a whole host of materials that are available, thoughts, and at the same time, if there are any questions, very happy to take them on. But equally, very, very happy to have bespoke sessions for each of you, or a follow-up session. And over to you, Yash.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gaurav.